Welcome to this latest interview about the new Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists online. The new encyclopedia, or the ESDA, was released on July 1st. It is the Seventh-day Adventist Church's first online reference work. It features thousands of articles from around the world on a rich variety of topics, including biographies of Adventist missionaries and evangelists, studies of Adventist institutions and beliefs. If you haven't checked the ESDA website yet, please do so. It's at encyclopedia.adventist.org. That's encyclopedia.adventist.org. And there you can browse almost 2,500 articles and look at 4,500 photographs. I'm David Trim. I am the director of the General Conference Office of Archive, Statistics and Research, and I am the editor of the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists online. And my co-host is Dr. Dragoslava Santrac, who is the managing editor of ESDA. And we are delighted to have as our guest today, Dr. Benjamin Baker. Dr. Baker was the first managing editor of the encyclopedia from April 2015 to October 2017. Currently, he is teaching literature and Black studies at the University of Maryland. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Dr. Baker, thank you for being with us. Could you please tell us something about your background? How did you become involved with the ESDA project?
I was actually a graduate intern at the Adventist Archives in the summer of 2011. Dr. David Trim, the ESDA editor, Dr. Santrac, he saw something in me that no one else saw. And he recruited me to come to the archives. And in many ways, David has been a mentor to me. He's a personal friend. And we started working together in the summer of 2011. And I would say about a year after that, I became assistant archivist of the GC archives. And I was very close to the holdings and possessions of the church. It was in many ways a dream job for me. I remember that some nights, I may not have told David this, but I would actually stay all night in the archives vault, just studying, researching. And before I knew it, you know, it was morning. So that was a dream job. And I would say that with the 150th anniversary of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 2013, and David, as director of the archives, this was something of, I would call it the Gilded Age of Adventist historiography, because from the General Conference administration, there was tremendous support of the Adventist archives and Adventist historiography in general. And so when we commemorated the 150th anniversary, there was kind of a digital revolution going on, as it were, not only in general society, but in Adventist studies as well. Because of course the ASTR site had vast amounts of materials on Adventism, you know, periodicals, publications from the past. Of course, the Center for Adventist Research and the Adventist Digital Library, plans for the ADL began, I would say, David, shortly around 2013.
Even before 2012 began, yeah.
Okay. 2015, the Ellen G. White estate released all of Ellen White's writings. And of course, the Adventist learning community was also coming into its own around. So many events kind of coalesced, as well as obviously the demographic shift that had been going on in the Adventist membership, 1980s and 1990s. And so from that, I think the leaders, Adventist archives had really been flourishing during that time. And so from all of those elements, as well as a really outdated encyclopedia, it was really first conceived in the 1960s, the early 1960s.
1950s, probably, actually.
Yes. And the first edition was published in 66, then 76, and then the final one in 96. But a lot of those articles were holdovers, and it didn't reflect the richness of Adventist scholarship and the caliber of Adventist scholars. And
so how did you've nicely set out how there was both the interest among church leaders in Adventist history. This is an interesting conjunction, in fact, and the awareness of the limitations. I would say actually among church leaders, even a limited awareness of the limitations of the old ESDA encyclopedia, which was even more limited probably than they were aware. And so those things came together. Tell us about the early beginnings of the ESDA project and your role in it.
Yes, well, I recall that one time you called me to your office and you told me about the project. And both of us, to give a sort of a insider's view, both of us were extremely tentative and hesitant about taking on such a massive project because we had some sort of sense of what it would entail. And so you told me that if we take this on, that I would be, the managing editor. And we were kind of batting it about and getting used to the idea. But I would say that's how it started. We were sort of daunted, but we knew that with God's help we could do it.
Yeah. Well, and also you say we had some sense. We didn't have enough of a sense of how big it would be. In fact, it turned out to be even worse than I had imagined. More difficult and complex than I had thought. So there was enough foresight not to put us off completely, and enough foresight maybe to enable us to do it. Maybe ignorance was bliss to some extent.
And David, we were so much younger back then. I had all my hair and all that stuff, and
I still have all my hair. I just thought I'd mention that. But
but Elder Wilson used to say, this is in 2015, 2016. He used to say that Jesus would come before the project was completed.
I don't think he said he would. He said he might.
He might. Okay, he might. And so I was like, even so, come Lord Jesus, and please make it sooner rather than later, because it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work.
Well, but I imagine there will be some kind of, maybe not a continuation of our work, certainly, but some kind of massive reference work in Paradise, and we'll get the answers to some questions we don't currently have. But short of Paradise, I think the ESDA is beginning to turn out all right. How did you find those first couple of years working as managing editor when we were still actually working out how we do the project?
Well, it was quite a shift because it was more administrative, whereas my former position as assistant archivist was dealing directly with research, directly with the primary sources and with the documents. And so we really kind of had to philosophically and ideologically undergird the project, as well as in good Adventist form, work out the administrative elements of it. There were a lot of politics, and I mean that in the best way, but dealing with people and institutions to create, and this I think is an underrated aspect of the encyclopedia. There were systems and checks and balances and kind of a bureaucracy that went behind it to create it. And that really had to be thought through. I mean, the offices in different parts of the world, the editorial offices, that didn't exist with the earlier iterations of the encyclopedia. And so I think that, it wasn't a stroke of genius, but I think that that was so in line with Adventist demographics and the coming of age of Adventist historiography that every part of the world was trusted to administer the articles themselves. I think that that's one of the geniuses of it.
Dr. Baker, I always enjoy so very much listening to these stories about how the vision of the ESDA was started and the project and all the people involved. And thank you very much for laying a firm foundation for this wonderful project and all this passion that you still carry. We can see them in your articles that you wrote for the ESDA.
Well, thank you for finishing it, Dr. Santrac.
Well, we are all working together. We are all working together with all these teams and all these wonderful people, and you are still with us, supporting us. So we are all together a team. But now that the ESDA has been launched, what do you think about the new encyclopedia online? In your opinion, does it meet your vision, the vision of the church leaders that was born several years ago? What do you think is the importance of the ESDA Online for the worldwide church?
I think that ESDA Online is superb. And my hat is off to you and David and all of the many editors and institutions that contributed to it. The highest compliment I can say for a website is that it is elegant and intuitive. It is so simple that I hardly know that I'm there. It's so simple that I don't pay attention to the website. And to me, that is the genius of the website. And the way that David and I always planned it was that it was always a dynamic thing. That's why it's online. And so if an article is missing or if an article needs to be edited or updated, it can easily be updated or supplied because it's online. That's the genius of it. So I think that the articles are going to keep growing. I think that it's going to have a long life. I mean, I know that, and it's going to grow with the church. And so that to me is one of the greatest attributes of it, that it's online and that it can change and grow, and that's it.
Yes. And as you mentioned, updating articles, making corrections. This is actually what we've been doing since the launch. People come to us with new information, with updates. They submit new photographs. Sometimes they point to certain corrections, smaller corrections that we need to make. And as you said, this is really the beauty of an online resource. It can be always updated, and it is available to all for free. That's another, I would say, good side of the online.
Unlike many reference works which are hidden behind a paywall. And this was one of the things we did discuss at an early stage. And it would have generated an ongoing revenue stream. But we felt, and the General Conference officers agreed, actually quite wholeheartedly, that this is a resource we want everyone to be able to access, regardless of where they are, so long as they have a relatively smartphone, which is now true across Africa and other parts of the world, or a laptop or a tablet, or even that antiquated technology, a desktop. Anyone can read it and learn and be inspired. And so I don't regret trying to erect a paywall in front of it, even though that might have helped us financially. What we want is for church members to be edified, to be inspired, at times to be chastened, and for the mission of the church to go forward. So I think that is important. But as you both said, the fact that it's a living document is actually a huge asset, and probably one that we're still realizing its value in some respects. We could foresee it in some respects, but I'm sure not entirely. And as Dr. Santrac has said, what she and Patricia Brower, who is her assistant and was Dr. Baker's assistant, and who has not yet been on camera, but who was really has been indispensable.
Yes.
What the two of them have been doing a lot of the time since July 1st is improving existing articles as well as adding some new ones. Dr. Baker, you've said what you think about the new encyclopedia online in terms of the website. I want to turn now to what you think of its substance in some respects. This year, of course, 2020 will go down in history for the pandemic, but also for the murders of George Floyd and others, which triggered protests, demonstrations, the like of which had not been seen for more than 50 years. So particularly important at this moment in history, it sounds portentous, but really it's true. At this moment in history, and indeed in the summer, as ESDA was launching, is an understanding of Black history. And I'm using that term actually with thinking of Steve Biko, the legendary activist in South Africa, who wanted to promote Black consciousness as something that could incorporate a range of African and African descended ethnicities. Your PhD was in the area of African American Adventist history. Your PhD was in African diasporic studies. You have taught at the Adventist University of Africa and taught a course on African Adventist history, which actually produced, and because it was a postgraduate level, it actually produced several articles for ESDA. You had students write term papers and so forth, and several of them are there, they're online. But so you have a particular perspective, perhaps unmatched, I would say, actually, unmatched in the Adventist Church, of that, not just Black American history, African American history, but of Black history, transatlantic history. Where does ESDA fit in to that? And where does it fit in? How does it speak to the kinds of debates and discussions that have been going on in this country, but also around the world in the last few months? That's a big question.
Yes.
But I'd really like to know your thoughts on that.
I thought that it was very astute that you positioned ESDA's founding amid the upheavals of this summer. And I think that that's one thing that historians who are looking back of ESDA are going to have to account of. It came out right during that time.
Well, of course, you and I foresaw this back in 2015. Obviously, we didn't. Who could have foreseen it? The date had been picked long ago, and yet somehow it turned out that it appeared with articles on hitherto ignored and forgotten figures. But I'm beginning to answer for you, so I'll stop.
Yes, well, I think that there are two historiographical issues that come up with the upheavals of the summer of 2020, and that is, number one, relevance. How is history relevant, particularly in the midst of cancel culture? When people are saying, okay, let's take, for instance, maybe an Adventist missionary. They're saying, oh, well, they were transporting the American Empire or the British Empire to this and this country, and it is a species of colonialism or what have you. And so they would want to cancel, let's say, a missionary or some figure in the past. I think that, as they did with the literal iconoclasm, some protesters of statues and things like that. So I think that more than ever, ESDA is making a case for the importance of past figures in Adventism. Okay, the second element, I think, is this idea of resuscitation. And that is, at different moments in time, David, you know that it's been said that writing history is more about the present than about the past. And so certain moments in time people consult history and consult figures in the past for a reason. Okay, whatever that reason is. Maybe it's how Adventists dealt with the pandemic, how Adventists dealt with race, were there figures, were there Adventist figures in the civil rights movements? What did Adventists say about slavery? So we need these tools, we need these resources to revisit the past for real guidance and direction for our present moment. And so, as you know, in the summer of 2020, because you were on some of these committees, they were asking about early Adventists and race. What did we say about race? What did it mean that Ellen White told the members to disobey the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act? What does it mean that early Adventists said that America was the lamb-like beast who spake as a dragon because of the way they enslaved 3 million Black people?
Right, the lamb-like beast of Revelation, just for those, any of our viewers who aren't aware. But
yes, the beast of Revelation 13, 11 through 18. What does that mean? And so I think that on the encyclopedia, not only is there a representation of ethnic figures, ethnic institutions, ethnic themes as never before. That was certainly not in the 1996, not in the 1976, but there are also authors of color telling that own story. And when they do that, there are now figures literally on the touch of your screen, on the touch of your cell phone screen, that you can use to speak to this present moment. And everyone coming and accessing it is looking for something different in this present moment.
Yeah.
Okay, people are like, but it's all there. There's a kernel inside the encyclopedia for people to be able to find what they are looking for. And you never know what that article will be because the times and the needs of people vary. And so I think that in this, post Black Lives Matter moment, that the encyclopedia is not only essential for representation, because Black people, people of color, Black institutions, issues, etc., are there, but the authors of color are narrating that experience, which is essential. Someone else is not writing about them; they are narrating that for itself. So that can speak to our 1,000 presents to come.
Yes,
that's very nicely put, I think, and it is one of the things that I feel a degree of pride in, that so many articles from Africa are by Africans. And in fact, as an African church leader said to Benjamin and me, actually in San Antonio near the end of the 2015 GC session, he said, we want to be able to tell our own story. And we know that people in America and Europe don't think we can. And to be fair, we haven't done it very well, but we believe we can. And so that opportunity, that essential opportunity has been afforded. And it's interesting. We have had the odd, some of the feedback we get, we've had the odd complaint about how articles on certain places or institutions don't foreground such and such a European missionary or American missionary who the person writing to us had heard about and loomed large in their imagination. Now, the truth is, ESDA has innumerable, countless, we couldn't count them all, Dragoslava, articles on missionaries from America, Western Europe, Australia. But the truth is, this is a legitimate perspective. It's the perspective of the people who were there, for whom the Western missionary was never the most important thing in their experience.
Yes.
And it's interesting, West Africa is where we've got currently the biggest number of articles we have by Africans are from West Africa, that we're beginning to add from elsewhere and from the Caribbean and of course Black communities in Europe and America. But in West Africa, they're particularly passionate about honoring Western missionaries. They're very, very strong on that. And yet they're also quite clear. The truth might have come to them with these people, but that's not the history of their country, of that institution. And so already we're seeing a much needed corrective
Yes.
to literally Eurocentric and Americentric views of African Adventist history. And we're beginning to get articles on Asian Adventist history also written by Filipinos, Chinese, and on India by Indians. So it seems to me that possibly in a small way, ESDA is actually speaking to this post-Black Lives Matters moment by saying both explicitly and implicitly, look, here is the richer history. Explicitly because you can read the stories, but implicitly because you can look at who the authors are and where they work, and sometimes the sources that they're citing. And you can, I hope that university students reading it right now, or hopefully waiting till the podcast is over, and then reading it, will actually say, yes, there's this church may have started in the United States of America, and it may have been built up by Europeans and Australians, but it is much, much more than that. And also, it's not just a white church. It was, and it was for too long in terms of its leadership and its control. But the truth is, since the 1920s, at least, it hasn't been a white church.
Yes.
And that needs to be recognized. And that perhaps is our small contribution to the dialogue that needs to be had in 2020 and going on into 2021. Do you see it that way? Or do you see it in a slightly different way? Because again, you come from the expertise of Black history.
No, definitely. That's very well put. And I think that even on a more basic level, we're just learning about Black figures that we just didn't know about. Someone focuses all their attention on finding out what they can about this person who we know about, and it turns out that their lives were so fascinating and so rich, and the way that they approached Adventism, the struggles that they went through, because especially with Black women, there were kind of three intersectional strikes. There was race, gender, and religion. Because when white Adventist evangelists went south, they were saying the prejudice for Adventism, the actual religion of Adventism, is as bad as the prejudice of race, it seems like. There was immense prejudice, so they were taking on an extra point of discrimination. And so just simply, David, to learn about these people that have never been written on before is going to be so amazing for, let's say, Black elementary schools. I mean, because I've always felt that the possibility for the ESDA are endless on so many levels. And one of those is just simply reading about them in elementary schools, or perhaps getting a Black Adventist pride. There are levels of pride. We are proud as Black Adventists.
And also in mission stories or Sabbath school stories, many churches are ethnically separated, Caribbean or African American. It doesn't just only have to be in elementary schools, but it would be even better in elementary schools, because they will be with students of other ethnicities and no longer need to feel, that they're second class. As Adventists, much less, whatever else is going on in society. Now, you've spoken again very eloquently, Dr. Baker, about how stories emerge of people, and we'll find out that people were significant who we had no idea until somebody actually works on them. And of course, that's not only true for African and African American and African Caribbean ethnicity people. It's also true for other minorities. And you actually have a second minority string to your bow, if I can put it that way, which is Jewish Adventist history. You've written several articles about early Jewish converts to Adventism. Tell us something about Frederick Cohen or Frederick Gilbert.
Yes, Frederick Gilbert was born in 1865 in Britain, and he was Jewish. His parents had escaped some of the persecution of Jews that existed in Poland/Russia. And when Gilbert was a young man, his father died, and he actually migrated to New York City, back then for your health. The sea voyage for your health, a new place, a new start. And so Gilbert was actually a practicing Jew. I mean, he kept the Seventh-day Sabbath, and he tried to keep his religion in New York, but he ended up kind of backsliding. He was taken in by an Adventist family called the Fisks, and he converted to Adventism. Now this is late 1880s. Now these early conversions meant more to Adventists in the 1880s than they probably do to us now, because this was when Adventists had realized their raison d'etre, and that is to preach the gospel to everyone in the world. And so when a person of a certain ethnicity converted to Adventism, that was to them a signal and a sign that Adventism could appeal to this different ethnic group.
It was proof that we were doing what Revelation 10 and 14 was telling us to do.
Yes. And that an actual a Jewish person who was studying for the rabbinate, studying to be a rabbi, he accepts Adventism. So this in some way gives us legitimacy, or at least gives us more of an assurance that this is to go to all the world. And so F.C. Gilbert began preaching Adventism, the Adventist gospel, which was really in a great degree Christ, and Christ in the sanctuary, and Christ coming again to Jews in Boston and New York. And he was really Adventism's first major Jewish evangelist. As you know, the organizational restructuring of 1901 to 1903 had sort of a mission particularity where different people of ethnicity would do missions for that group, and that actually became it impounded into our structure. And so Gilbert was Adventism's first evangelist to the Jews, but his entire career he tried to marry the Jewish faith, the Orthodox Jewish faith, and Adventism, and to show that Adventism was really a fulfillment of Judaism. So I think that in that, Gilbert was extremely unique, because I don't think that anyone has done that from a Jewish perspective with his sort of insider knowledge as F.C. Gilbert did.
Yeah. What's very interesting about Gilbert, and I read this in your article, you wrote that more than anything else, it was the Christian compassion and lifestyle of the Fisks that impressed Gilbert during the years that he lived with them. He even wrote, they lived their religion more than they talked it. Their lives were indeed a living exposition of the Christian religion. So it was actually the compassion, as he says, and the lifestyle, the Christian character of this Christian Adventist family that helped Gilbert be converted and accept Christ as his savior. Is there a lesson for Christians today from Gilbert's experience and what he wrote about this family?
Yes, that's a very good question. Gilbert was raised to despise Christians, not only because he was an Orthodox Jew, but because of the pogroms and the persecution that his family had experienced in Europe. Christians were literally an existential threat to Jews. And so Gilbert had quite the animosity toward Christians. He would spit when he walked past the church. And there was also the the racism, the ethnic prejudice and discrimination that existed in London of that day toward Jews from Christians. And so Gilbert was dealing with all of these elements, and he was not predisposed to Christians. In fact, he said that, you know, he would rather die than become a Christian. And so when he stayed with the Fisks, there's a lot of missiological lessons for us to learn. They took him in when he was vulnerable, when he needed help. He was away from his home. He was in a new land. He wasn't familiar with the culture, and they took him in and they treated him like he was their son. And so Gilbert really says that that's what won me over. I mean, later he would start reconciling Adventism with, he would work on the intellectual piece. But initially it was that compassion. And I think that that's still the case with our missions. It's compassion that wins people.
So you bringing out their practical missiological or missional lessons. So is the biographies in the ESDA then, are they more than just stories? Are there other practical lessons that can be drawn from the lives of people you've written about, and indeed other biographies? Is it that kind of work, or is it chiefly a work for academic historians and people who love stories? Or can it
David's gracious enough to give me some softball questions. Because of course, the encyclopedia is a product of the mission family. It's a product of the GC Secretariat, if you will. And our object in doing the encyclopedia was a part of the mission of the church. And it was that literally when people read these, they will be infused with the same spirit of the missionaries of Adventism that created, you know, the 22 million strong movement that we now have. And so we did it thinking of those missional implications. And I think definitely not only in the articles, but in the materials with the articles, simple missional strategies that built up, the membership and the worldwide movement that we are now. Missional strategies are all throughout those articles, not only the positive ones, but the ones that we can learn and grow from that seem to be mistakes. Those are all through there. So I would encourage people to not only look at the articles themselves, but to fasten on a certain aspect of an article and then look in the sources to find more on that aspect. Because there are indeed tremendous lessons from the biographies and the institutions for missions.
Yes, indeed. We don't want to be just informed by the ESDA stories. We want us to be transformed by them, transformed in a sense for a greater purpose in life, for a renewed commitment to Adventist mission and God's work on this earth. And if the ESDA can contribute even in a small way to this bigger task, we can say that we have truly done a good work and be grateful to God for that.
Yes.
Dr. Baker, in the end, we have to draw this interview to the end, unfortunately. What would you recommend to our readers? How can they use the ESDA in their personal education and ministry to others? You already touched this question, but perhaps one last time, if you could just tell to our readers what you recommend to them, especially about the ESDA for their personal edification.
Yes, I think that the online ESDA has endless possibilities. I mean, literally, anything can be done. I read it, Dr. Santrac, for entertainment. Just pure entertainment. But beyond that, in schools, it can be used in schools. It can be used in churches. It can be used around the world in church administrative units for decision-making, for guidance. It can be used by those in ministry for guidance on how to minister. We know that we face, more than ever, we face formidable mission challenges. And I think that lessons are all throughout those articles. Of course, it can be used by those in scholarly fields for research. There's so many different, we can start YouTube channels making videos on the articles. We can illustrate the articles. You can use them for preaching. There are literally endless ways to use them. Of course, schools can use them for teaching, and we used to always encourage professors to assign their classes to write articles. Of course, this is, history classes or graduate classes, but assign students to write articles, assign students to look at articles and to see, look at the perspective, see what could be added, endless possibilities. So whenever someone asks, should the encyclopedia be used for A, B, C, or D, I would say yes. All of them. That's how endless the possibilities are.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Baker, thank you so much for being our guest. This has been a fantastic conversation. We wish it could continue. Hopefully we'll bring you back for another video podcast another time. There is more we could talk about, including the articles you wrote on African American and African Adventist history. But thank you for being our guest today, and indeed thank you for your invaluable contribution to the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists.
Thank you both.
That was Dr. Benjamin Baker. Please read his articles and check the other articles, now nearly 2,500 of them, at encyclopedia.adventist.org. We'll see you again soon with more stories from the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists online and more authors and editors of the ESDA, the people who have helped build it up and know it well, and will help you to know it well. Remember again, it's at encyclopedia.adventist.org. We'll see you again soon. God bless.